And I just thought to myself, just imagine if this was a school. You know, if you had the kids sitting in such a relaxed environment, and when they could be indoors or outdoors, it just would feel normal. Why do we actually even consider the design of a school that locks kids into a box when they're not going to learn to collaborate, they're not going to learn to actually appreciate learning? And also, you know, families have a lounge room or a living room where all ages meet. Why do schools suddenly separate kids out by age? You know, just because I went through a system that was all exams and was all about, you know, these boundaries that we were given, that doesn't mean it's relevant to the future. I mean, you might have heard of the term unschooling before. Basically, we had to look at everything that was preventing kids from actually wanting to be in a learning community. So we had to get rid of every word. So yes, we got rid of the word school. We have a hub, we have a learning community. We got rid of teachers, their learning guides. We got rid of timetables, their schedules. We got rid of exams. We have curated artifacts where kids create visible aspects of their learning so we can see what they can do. But yeah, so basically we've taken everything out. Learning is all based on relationship, absolutely 100%, so that you have to put all of the effort on creating that psychologically safe relational space for the child or the teenager before you do anything else. And once you've done that, you can do anything.
And how do you create that? Good
question. You certainly don't do it as a half hour on a Monday morning and call it well-being or yoga. So, you know, once relationships are in place, we then focus on purpose. You help them understand and discover their passions as they move through. So the next thing we're looking at there is, how do you create the culture where they subliminally don't even think they don't even think about it, but when they come into the space, learning is the focus. So we view topics through a transdisciplinary lens, and that's basically sitting above all of the other disciplines. If you view it through the lens of saying the world is full of these systems and our role is to try and understand them.
Hi, and welcome back to New World of the Making. Today, I'm especially excited because we have Stephen Harris with us, co-founder of LearnLife, a radically different kind of learning community born from questioning what school could actually look like. Stephen has spent decades rethinking the whole educational system and has built the environments for that. For someone like me, who always dreamt really of learning in freedom and following their own interests, having a learner-centered, life-oriented school like LearnLife feels like a revelation. In this conversation, we explore what personal learning education really means, how self-management, creativity, and purpose can redefine learning, and what skills matter for the future. How does an education system really support growth and evolution, and how does this look in practice? I'm so grateful for Stephen for sharing his insight, and I hope this episode inspires you as much as it inspired me. So let's dive in.
Just a quick one, and I promise quick one before we dive into the episode. I really want to take a moment to just say thank you for being here. And to keep this work alive and help it reach even more people, I need your help. Just by hitting that subscribe button, you're becoming an active part of this new world of the making. And you're enabling this conversation to grow into directions we can't even imagine yet. So thank you truly. And now for real, let's dive into today's conversation.
Stephen, thanks so much for being here today.
That's all right.
I'm very much looking forward to exploring all these very interesting topics that we're going to talk about today about education. But before that, I would love to know a bit more about you, how you came into this field, and maybe for someone that has no idea who you are, could you share a bit more about you?
Okay. Yeah, what part's relevant? I was actually born in New Zealand. I guess that's a little bit relevant because as a child, I had a number of opportunities that were slightly different because of my father's occupation. He was a university professor, and twice as a child, I went round the world in a boat because as a family we travelled from New Zealand to England via a boat, and called in at probably 30 to 40 different countries during the four times through the Panama Canal going through. And I guess that obviously started up a sense of travel and a wonder at the world. But it also, ironically, when I was 11 and one of the trips, I was doing New Zealand correspondence school, and we actually managed to do virtually the entire year's work on the boat going over to England in the 3 weeks. It was just in those days, it was just like, paper that you had to fill out, stencils and sheets, worksheets. And my brother and I basically did most of it during that time, which meant that we then had this incredible year where we explored Roman ruins and medieval castles and did all sorts of things. In those days you could actually climb all over Stonehenge, and I think that experience really showed me about learning. Learning. I mean, okay, we could do all of the paperwork, and we could do that extremely fast if you weren't then having to go into school every day and walk around and do everything slowly. So we just knocked off that side. But then the actual real learning happened as we explored England, going through for a year. And I guess I've taken that concept has followed me into adulthood. That says basically that schools should be about exploring and our curiosity and discovering, and really those of us who are adults in a school context have got the ability to manage the environment to make it interesting for kids, and disengagement and lack of interest in learning is actually not the kids' problem, it's our problem as adults. And what are we prepared to change and do? So anyway, I mean, as a later teenager, we moved to Sydney, which has been my sort of hometown ever since, although I did spend a year on an island in the Pacific, because I think, having travelled past islands as a child, I always had this sort of desire to go and live in an island for a year where I was a teacher on Norfolk Island, it was called. And I've finished up as a person who didn't really enjoy formal school when I got back into it, but finished up as a teacher. And I guess my entire journey. Yeah, well, the government was offering free scholarships to university for teachers, so I took that. But then I guess more importantly, I discovered that I liked it, and then I discovered that as a teacher, I could actually create the environment and the culture of the classroom. And even if I had hopeless school leaders, I was learning from them. I was either learning what not to do or what to do, and so then, when I became, first opportunity became a deputy principal quite young, and was in charge of well-being in a school. And again, I learned a lot about how do you relate to teenagers who might be problematic. I guess I learned the whole value of relationship being at the core of everything that you do. And then I finished up becoming principal of a school, and I had this amazing opportunity where it was only 250 kids when I took it over, and I was asked to grow it to 1,400 and to make it one of the best schools in Australia. So I had this amazing opportunity just to not only grow a school, but to grow the culture and to have to design buildings as well. So, if you're in Australia, people see me as I guess, I was introduced the other day at a conference on architecture and education as the father of innovation in Australia's schools. I smiled at that one and laughed. And I guess it came down to the fact that I had the opportunity. Well, I had to build buildings for the school that was growing, and so I just thought, well, why repeat mistakes from the past? Why not do things very differently? Which is what I did. And then from there, I was doing a PhD towards the end of that process. And then so I stepped back from being a school principal, finished off the PhD, and around that time I'd met Christopher Pomeranian, who's the German entrepreneur who had started LearnLife in Barcelona. And he asked me if I'd like to join at the start of that project. And I said yes. And that started the process of living in two cities, because I didn't want to leave Sydney for a whole range of reasons, but none the least that I had very elderly parents, and my father lived to 101 and my mother to 96, and they both passed away in the last few years. And so I lived in two cities, literally going backwards and forwards for like a month, 5 weeks, 6 weeks at a time to Barcelona, then back to Sydney for a couple of months, and then back again. And then in the middle of all of that, back a little bit. Back in 2007 and 8, I was asked to go to Africa to have a look at schools that had been funded by a microfinance organisation called Opportunity. And that was in Malawi, Kenya, and Uganda. And I went there a couple of times to sort of check out multiple schools to make sure that they weren't being set up as scam, opportunities. And then whilst I was there, someone said, you really should go to Rwanda because they need someone who can do things like you can do. And so I finished up starting going to Rwanda in 2008, and I've been going there every year since. So I've been to Rwanda over 35 times. I've got a friend there who counts them. And I've run different projects, but most recently we've started LearnLife Rwanda, which is a program for adults who have finished university but don't know how to turn their knowledge into an income, or people who have perhaps been a refugee or been disrupted by war or something else in their life, and they really want an opportunity to learn how to collaborate and start a business. And so LearnLife Rwanda came into being about a year ago, and that's another little thing that distracts me.
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions. There's so much I wanna dive into. Maybe let's start with chronologically with when you were a principal at the school and grew it and completely transformed it. Because also I'm very intrigued and interested in how you actually did that. Because my dad, he used to be a high school teacher, and he eventually just left because the system was very it was very hard for him to actually do something a little bit different. It didn't used to be like that when he started, and then it got incrementally more and more difficult. So he left. But you completely transformed it, and you just completely changed the whole structure and even designed a whole school. So how did you do that?
Look, I think I've never been one to follow rules. So in that one
Right.
sense, the best background for a school leader was a person who broke rules, because that was me, and I didn't see rules as being important. So then when I became a principal, I then looked to find all of the gaps that I could in the system. So that in the Australian context, I knew that if I played with the required number of hours or minutes that you had to teach different subjects, that you could actually play with them in a way where you create like literally a day and a half a week, which was free to do whatever you wanted to do. So we started a subject in that school for the year 7 and year 8 kids. That's 11, 12, 13-year-olds, called Unlimited. And it was basically an early version of passion projects. And then I worked out that, in year 9 and 10, although the government actually had elective courses that schools were teaching, if you read the rules, they weren't compulsory. And so I said to teachers, okay, if you want to teach those courses, that's fine, but you're going to have to submit all of your programs and all of the administration. If you want to create a new course that you call the music industry rather than music, then you're going to have freedom just to do it. And so we again, we created time and space for kids aged 14, 15, 16. And then I guess, once you start a school on a cultural shift, you don't suddenly then say, when they're older, that you've got to suddenly sit down in rows and do everything traditionally. I guess we really explored, what did it mean? And we were the first school in Australia to offer online final year courses as well. So we had a look at so kids. Well, one of the things we did was, if students actually had to take 6 subjects in the Australian system, then possibly they did 2 of them online and 4 of them face to face, and they really enjoyed the opportunity to do things a little bit differently. Yeah. So I guess I've just always been happy to explore things, but then I guess one of the key things for me is learning is all based on relationship, absolutely 100%, so that you have to put all of the effort on creating that psychologically safe relational space for the child or the teenager before you do anything else. And once you've done that, you can do anything.
And how do you create that?
Good question. You certainly don't do it as a half hour on a Monday morning and call it well-being or yoga. You actually, it's well-being and psychological safety is 24/7, and so you've actually got to create an authentic relationship with the kids, now with the children or the teenagers, such that they don't see a hierarchy, they don't see you as trying to control them, that ultimately what we've been doing is the end point isn't an exam, it's actually agency. It's actually their ability to do learning by themselves. So that final point that we head them towards is showing us that they can be autonomous. And now kids actually respond to that.
Okay, I want to dive more into that when we talk about Learnlife, because I'm
Yes.
highly curious there. But before that, what have you learned also? Because you were saying that you designed the school. So what kind of what kind of environments did you try to really put into place, and what kind of impact has beauty in learning?
Yeah, I mean, the journey towards designing buildings was an interesting one, because I knew it had to be co-created. It just couldn't be me by myself going through. So it was always with a team. So I worked out how to exploit cheap airfares and whatever I could do to take a team, and we could visit places, but we didn't go and visit schools. We did visit some schools, but we normally visited museums or interesting spaces. I mean, I can remember going to Auckland in New Zealand, and I was involved in running a course for teachers' professional development. But after that, we went to this pub hotel, and it was a beautiful mix of indoor, outdoor, as Australia and New Zealand do quite well. And I just thought to myself, just imagine if this was a school. If you had the kids sitting in such a relaxed environment, and when they could be indoors or outdoors, it just would feel normal. And whenever I ask New Zealand school teachers or leaders at conferences about what are the spaces that they like, no New Zealander ever says an indoor space. It's always outdoors. It's somewhere outdoors. As a country, they just, they love the outdoors. So then why do we actually even consider the design of a school that locks kids into a box when they're not going to learn to collaborate? They're not going to learn to actually appreciate learning. And so I guess that type of thinking started to really influence me. I don't know whether you've seen, but the building I designed, or we designed at Northern Beaches in the middle 2010s. It was finished in 2015. It actually won 8 different national awards, including the best educational building and the most sustainable building. But then the sustainable part was interesting, because I had seen a school in Washington, D.C. It was the Friends School, actually. Obama's kids were there. And I suddenly noticed on the walls of the school, they had made all of the plumbing visible so that they actually had, rather than plasterboard, they had glass, and you could see how the building worked. And then I guess that really stuck with me because the building became a learning device in itself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so at Northern Beaches, we took the opportunity. The building in the end generates its own water and its own electricity, and
Oh,
for the
really?
kids to understand how that works in a
Oh,
building makes it
yeah,
then second nature to themselves. Yeah.
of course. That's so cool. And
And
how,
also, I mean, one of the other things there that I
yeah.
learned was, families have a lounge room or a living room where all
Mm,
ages meet. Why
yeah.
do schools suddenly separate kids out by age? And I guess that was one thing I thought, okay, we have to be able to do this where a 5-year-old and an 18-year-old can share a space. Doesn't have to be every space, but they can share a central area where the relationships are just normal. Where you've got 5-year-olds, you've got 18-year-olds, and the 5-year-old's behaviour will be modified by the 18-year-old, and the 18-year-old's behaviour and language will be modified by the 5-year-old. But it's just normal. It's what happens in their houses.
No, no, totally. Totally. And what kind of changes have you seen in that at that stage? What kind of changes would you see, and how would that maybe also impact your trajectory? Because I could imagine that maybe in the beginning there were maybe more resistance coming from external forces, and maybe also some internal resistance of, am I, it's just like such an innovative path. Are there any, just sometimes resistance?
Okay, going through, I guess I had the ability at Northern Beaches because we grew to pick people that wanted to join. Now, that didn't mean that every person was suitable, but
Mhm.
if they had the desire to learn and to grow, well, then
Okay.
they were going to come into the team and they had to become part of the process, and their ideas were just as important as anyone else's. And I guess in one sense that happened at Northern Beaches, but then it's happened all the more at LearnLife
Yeah.
because, in the LearnLife one, well, you're just not going to survive if you can't open a transparent environment because there are no classrooms. Everything is visible and every relationship is equal. And so
Yeah.
that, again, that the actual selection process there for the teachers is something that we did. I started at Northern Beaches, but we continued on at LearnLife. Whereas, we try and bring in as many candidates for a position all together at the one
Mm,
time, because I know that if they can't cope with seeing each other as candidates, they will
mm,
never cope in the environment that they're applying to join going through. So, and then we would play improv drama games and different things to actually, again, see what was their
yeah.
comfort zone. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, fascinating. And internally, did you ever have doubts about some of the things that?
No. The honest answer is no, because I know that, I guess my belief was always in the kids,
Mm,
and
wow.
look, I think going to a country like Rwanda as well, when you see the worst of a traditional system being run throughout the country, where we might think a class of 30 is large in our countries. Well, in Rwanda, they've got classes of 50 to 80. We might think that it's difficult if we haven't got a screen or a whiteboard. Over there, they're lucky to have a blackboard that works. We complain if we don't get electricity for half an hour. Over there, they could go for an entire day without. And as I looked at the system there and I thought, and this is ridiculous, because I know that as a country they've done really well getting kids into school, but the quality is hopeless. It's you've got kids doing exams in languages they can't speak, nor can their teachers speak, going through. And I guess when you look at that, and then you come back to Spain, Australia, or elsewhere, you then say, we have the ability to change it. We have to change it. So that if we're stuck in the wrong paradigm, the responsibility is ours to change it and to push through the bureaucracy or the complaints or anything else. But the other thing is that parents aren't going to send their kids to a school like Northern Beaches or Learnlife if they don't have an understanding that things need to be different. So that and I look and to be I've watched parents say we just love what you're doing and we want our child to be there, but you can see that they're panicking about maths or they're panicking about can my child write an essay, and then I guess Learnlife has now been in existence for long enough for them to see the deep learning that's happening for the older kids especially, to then see, okay, there is another way. Just because I went through a system that was all exams and was all about, these boundaries that we were given, that doesn't mean it's relevant to the future.
Okay, so then now let's move into Learnlife. For someone that has never been or heard about Learnlife and enters the school, or well, not school, what would they experience?
I mean, you might have heard of the term unschooling before. That was that came out of America. Basically, we had to look at everything that was preventing kids from actually wanting to be in a learning community. So we had to get rid of every word. So yes, we got rid of the word school. We have a hub. We have a learning community. We got rid of teachers, their learning guides. We got rid of timetables, their schedules. We got rid of exams. We have a curated artifacts where kids create visible aspects of their learning so we can see what they can do. But yeah, so basically we've shaken everything out. And when we started, we actually had to get rid of math because that was so negative for the kids who, we had 10, 15 kids when we first started. We've now got the full 200 there in the main hub. Mathematics was such a negative experience that we just decided, okay, let's just forget it. And so we forgot it for about 5 months. And then the kids ultimately asked and said, can you help us do a couple of things? And so it gave us the perfect opportunity to bring in a person that was really innovative with maths and also a really good mathematician. And he joined our team. He's now one of the co-leads of the program. And now, ironically, we've got kids opting into an applied mathematics calculus class by choice as if it was their studio. Again, if you're prepared to do things yeah, but that wasn't scary, but it was a very sensible decision because we just knew that we could have forced the kids into doing math and they would have hated it. They would have finished up leaving the program because they weren't ready for it. But ultimately, they worked out what they needed. Yeah.
And how do you create that environment for the kids to know what they need? Because sometimes maybe some would say, well, they just don't know because they haven't seen it, or that they don't, they're not exposed.
Okay, well, a good question. We actually have a framework that we do follow. So, I mean, it's a little bit like the iceberg. What people would see when they come in is the tip of the iceberg. There's the bulk is underneath. So once relationships are in place, we then focus on purpose, and we have used the Japanese philosophy ikigai, which is looking at what do I like, what am I good at, what does the world need, and what I can make money from. We use that as a conversation starter, but also recognizing that kids will change, and so that whatever they say when they're 12 is going to be quite different from when they're 15. However, you don't lock them into a lifelong purpose. A little statement that says I'm going to become an architect, nothing's going to change. You help them understand and discover their passions as they move through. So the next thing we're looking at there is how do you create the culture where they subliminally don't even think they don't even think about it. But when they come into the space, learning is the focus, and that can be done because you've got to then say how does society shape cultures? Kids are seeing ads every day there, or they're going skating or surfing or shopping or whatever else they're doing. That's all part of their culture. So I guess what we've done is we've said, okay, we want to make learning a culture that's stronger than the other ones when they come into this space. And so you just shape it going through. And I think the beautiful thing is that at a certain point, they take over that growth. They take over the journey. And the one thing I've been trying to get my head around in the last couple of years at LearnLife is how have the kids created a culture where there is no bullying? Because they come into LearnLife at the urban hub and they're all teenagers and there's no bullying. There's respect, and it's just as normal for a 12-year-old to be celebrating a 17-year-old's success in something, or the other way around, because it's not something that we've actively done, but it's something that's arisen out of the culture that's been created because of the focus on respect and, I guess, inclusion and all of those things that you sort of have to shape going through. And then the next part of the piece is we focus then on, well, what are the skills of being independent as a learner and taking ownership of your own learning? So we then focus on that, and we got rid of the word personalised, because when you talk about personalised education or learning or schooling, that still suggests that either a computer algorithm or an adult is selecting for you. So we just make it personal. So the goal is to make learning personal, where the individual knows what they want. Yeah.
The paradigm shift diagram I saw that. So fascinating. So so you shifted from standardized, personalized to co-created and then personal, kind of like that journey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then so once the kids can do it personal, then the role of the school or the community is finished, because they can do it. That's they don't need to have an exam that suddenly tells them that they can do it. They just should be out there doing it. And so I guess that's when we have the whole focus on, can you use your learning to make a positive impact, number one, and then two, how are you going to make that learning visible to the universities or to the employers or to whoever you want to invest in your startup idea. So that process starts from the age of 6 as well, that you start to learn that everything you're doing has to be packaged together at some point to show others what you can do, and that becomes a cyclic process.
Wow, that's such a beautiful way of learning. Of course, it makes so much sense. Okay, so just to kind of bring it even more to some like concrete understanding how a day would look like. I understand it, every day and for every child it's going to look different, but could you walk us through like
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's different primary and secondary, obviously, as well, because you've got there's an age difference.
Okay.
But the idea of agency and creating artifacts of your learning is relevant to both groups. But let's take the hub that's in central Barcelona, which is the teenage one. Okay, so we don't have subjects, we have building blocks. So we view topics through a transdisciplinary lens, and that's basically sitting above all of the other disciplines. So, for instance, we look at natural systems, and that will then involve an understanding of environment, science, nature, ecology. It could be any of those things. And so there you then ask there's a challenge question that you might be trying to answer that needs an understanding of the natural systems of the world. And then we have the numeric systems, and then we have the language systems of the world. So again, so kids are seeing things they're learning the concepts, which are, I understand that in mathematics, for instance, you've got to understand the concept of what 1 and 1 is to be able to add them up to, and that becomes a skill, and ultimately you're growing your competence. But if you view it through the lens of saying the world is full of these systems and our role is to try and understand them. So kids come into, and they will have a schedule depending on their age and stage, because there's 3 programs. There's what we call explorers, creators, change makers, roughly years 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, roughly. They don't progress because of their age. They only progress when they actually tell us that they're ready to show us that they're ready for the next stage. Now, that means that it's about a 6-month process. So they've got to tell us, they're age 14 and they think that they're ready for creators. So then they have to then go through this whole list of, you've got to show us that you actually have mastered all of the competencies that you actually need to have done as a 14-year-old. You need to actually have self-assessed and had it validated by a learning guide. You need to have done things in a collaborative project and a solo project. You need to have done a research project. You need to have done something that's sort of social impact for good. And then you've got to nominate a rite of passage that you're going to organise for yourself when you think you're ready to move on. So it actually takes, there's no exam. There's no exam, not 1 mark or anything else. But you've actually got to tick all the boxes. You've got to actually see that, okay, this is what's required if I want to be in this next group. And then in that next group, you're going to have more freedoms because you're actually ready for it going through gradually. So it's not like a wild animal farm. It's actually quite it's quite scaffolded going through. And then the scaffolds come off as you show autonomy.
Oh, wow. That is so much more in line with life. I mean, this is how we move through stages as well in life, right? So
Yeah.
it just makes so much sense. And I would have loved, for something that was like this when I was in school.
I mean, the really encouraging thing is that when people come and visit us in Barcelona, common thing is they'll say they've heard all of the theory, but they've suddenly seen somewhere where the threads all come together and they can see that it's possible. But to make it possible, you've got to do the relational part. And that's where I think the teaching workforce are at a great disadvantage because they've never been asked to focus on emotional intelligence. They've been told that content delivery is important and controlling your classroom. Whereas, if you had a far greater focus on neuroscience and the psychology of learning, you'd probably have teachers far more capable of connecting. It's not the teacher's fault. It's actually the system's fault.
Yeah. So what kind of support do these kids need in order to gain that
Okay,
excel?
well, again, and that, I guess we go back to the schedule focus. They all have a mentor, and so that there's an adult that becomes their advocate and their contact, their friend, not necessarily their coach, but they could well be the person that's finishing up in that building block with them. And that we have something that's called open path. Now, as the kids get to a certain point in an area, like for instance, there was a girl who'd been doing she'd been in the art studio, as part of her afternoon program, and then she just asked, could she go open path, which basically meant that she has these 3 or 4 hours a week where she can just devote herself to her artwork. And I just watched her thrive because she could opt out of having to do it in the process that we had established, to then saying, no, I can do it by myself now, thanks. And we, when they do that, they actually do it in the context of a co-working space where everyone can see it, And so again, it's quite inspirational for the other kids because they're then seeing the learners really go deep into their passions, and it's in a very visible space. And so that becomes the goal, because they can sort of see, oh, hang on, I'd like to have half a day a week where I can just do it myself.
That's so cool. And what other areas you have? Because you also have a kitchen. I've seen that you do cooking.
Okay. There's sort of about 10 different studios that have been established, and again, the philosophy there is that they're not fake studios; they're real studios. So that you don't wait till you finish school till you hit life. No, life starts when you're born. So the kitchen is a kitchen, and it's we have Catalan chefs come in occasionally, and kids can opt into those days where they'll finish up selecting a traditional Catalan dish. They then go off to the markets and they learn to barter and to buy, and then they have to come back and produce the food within a certain time, and then they sell it to the community, and then whatever profits are created, they can then buy more plates to then sell more next week. So there's a food studio, there's a robotics coding studio, there's a design thinking studio, there's multimedia, there's textiles, there's visual arts, there's music recording, light manufacturing, ceramics. So a whole range. But then if kids have got a studio interest that we don't cater for, well, then they can also go off to that. If there's another venue that is relevant, they can go off to that. And we bring in studio experts. So when we haven't got the expertise on our team, you might get someone in for 2-hour slots during the week to come in as the expert for that studio, and then in their kids' schedule, they will actually then select that particular studio at that time so that they can gain the expertise when they need it. Yeah.
Wow. It's like a kid's dream, like even an adult's dream.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the other challenges for me was, I never liked the idea that kids come into a school and they have to adopt the timetable of the school.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I wanted to turn that upside down and say, no, we have to be able to adapt to the passions of the individual child. And how do you do that? And yes, it does require a framework at the schedule, but it requires the ability to be able to change any aspect of it, depending on the kid.
Yeah. And how do you do that in the other hub for smaller children?
Okay, good question. So the Eco Hub and also the Village Hub, they have studios, but they look a little bit different. So they might be more makerspace. They might be more, designing with cardboard and whatever else, recycled scraps and stuff they're finding. Their building blocks are different. They have word chop, and word chop is where they actually learn. It's either in Spanish or English, and they're learning language skills, I guess. They've got create and they've got imagine. They have, so that the building blocks which hold their learning together are more focused on growing the skills and the concepts that they need, but also giving them the imagination and bringing those things together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the same concept, but just with different building blocks. Yeah. And still very relational. So and the belief that even a 6-year-old is capable of creating something to demonstrate to their parents or to their learning guide what they've learnt every 10 weeks. So we have this showcase where, there's 3 things that kids have to prepare for. They will have what we call the 360. That's actually an individual child with their parents and their learning guide and possibly a couple of friends, and they're going to talk between 20 minutes or an hour if you're older. It's hard to shut them up. where they have to select items to show those people that they've learnt and what they've learnt and how they've learnt, and they can't use a PowerPoint. So so that's a process that happens 2 or 3 times a year. And then we have a showcase. So that's like an exhibition of learning. So every child is actually having to choose something which they can demonstrate, sitting on it at their little booth for half an hour, as part of a 2-hour showcase. And then any adult's going to come up to them and ask them about what it is, what's this all about. And so that they're learning to verbalize their learning as well. Yeah.
Goodness, this sounds so exciting. And okay, so in what kind of basis have you based everything on? I mean, you're not following any specific free school script or anything. What are influences that resonate with you?
Look, I've been in schools for 4.5 decades, so for a long time. I've read the research. I've followed it through. Probably if there's anything that's really influenced me in the last 10, 15 years, it's what we've learned through neuroscience, the neuroscience of learning, the neuroscience of engagement, the neuroscience of dopamine effect. In other words, really having a look at what does science say about how we learn. Now, behind that, I mean, there are people who, have been amazing advocates for changing the system, like Sir Ken Robinson, his talks were pretty powerful. There's a New Zealand professor called Professor John Hattie who looked at a lot of research around what are the most effective methods of learning. So, I mean, we've read those, we've learnt them, but my view is you choose the best of what works, and we gradually put that together. And I mean, Montessori have recognised us as being an outstanding example of child-centered learning, but we're not Montessori, and they're not making us become Montessori, but they're recognising that we've got probably a lot of Montessori type concepts happening, because again, not that we've gone through different approaches and said, let's choose that, let's choose this. We've actually literally chosen, we've created ourselves from the ground up using our combined knowledge of what works. And I mean, I can remember years ago laughing when I heard an American school saying that they were wanting to take into recognition that teenagers need to sleep in longer. So they were changing the start of the school day from 7:15 to 7:45. I just thought, no, that's ridiculous. Now at Learnlife, the younger kids come in at 9, but the 15, 16, 17-year-olds come in at 10. And their day goes through to 4 or 5. So again, you've got to be realistic about, don't pay lip service to the theory. If it says that teenagers, work best late night, then a long sleep, get up a little bit later, then allow that to become the rhythm for the day. Don't pretend otherwise.
Yeah, amazing. And what about technology?
Yeah. Good. Again, a great question, because a community like Learnlife is going to have everyone in it. It's going to have the parents who want technology, and it's going to have the parents who are worried about screen time. It's going to have all of those views, and they're all very, very normal views. What's interesting in the Urban Hub is that through conversation with the kids, we have a mobile phone hostel near the door, and they they put their phone into the hostel when they arrive, but it doesn't have to stay there all day long. If they're going to go outside, they can get their phone again, and if they need their phone for a project that they're doing, they just have to come to the front desk and say, "Can I, I'll just take my phone out again." And so I guess there's an owned responsibility for responsible use of mobile devices, for instance. for the younger kids, we don't want to have them on the screen all day long. Now there are some excellent programs that are actually screen based, but then you need to have a look at and say, well, if they're going to be spending half an hour on the screen there, let's try and give them an hour and a half with an activity that's either outdoors, nature based, or whatever else, where you're retaining that balance. I use AI a lot because I would never have been able to start the project in Rwanda, this recent one, if I didn't actually have my AI workforce helping me
Yeah,
with everything.
totally
Um,
agree.
and I guess that's taught me a lot there. But then I also recognise that schools, if schools talking about they're worried about AI and kids cheating and copying and pasting, I just think, well, they have no idea as adults how to use it. Yeah, and that's the reality. If that's the concern that you have, because there are so many things. I mean, I would like older kids to start to learn, if they've got a group of three working on a project, that the fourth in their team is actually the AI, and that that there's constant interaction between them, where they're starting to learn to use it to advance their thinking or advance the administration or whatever else it could be helpful with, and then recognize that that's the way that life is going anyway. Uh, and kids have to learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
But technology it's always a balance, because you want to make sure that the technology is not creating a cultural issue that you don't want. Um, and I know that, I mean, one thing I learned years ago back at Northern Beaches was we didn't have, compared to other schools, we didn't have much cyberbullying happening, but that was because we said anything that's written online by a member of the school, like a kid, is actually part of our playground and will be interested in what's going on. Now, the kids then understood that at 10:30 at night, if they were going to then write something negative about someone else, that was going to become a community issue, because it's part of our playground. And and so once we actually extended that thinking through, ultimately the playground self-managed. Yeah. And I guess that's what you want to get to. You want to get to the place where in that playground someone will then pick up someone else for saying something that's inappropriate and say you shouldn't be saying that, because that's the most effective pushback. Yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't actually had that sort of level of issue at LearnLife. And I
Mm,
think that comes down to the fact that the kids respect each other so much. Yeah.
yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, it comes back to what you were saying in the beginning, relationships, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we have, restorative conversations. If something has happened that's between two people where they've misunderstood each other,
Mm,
well, then you give them the opportunity to either sort it out themselves, or do you need to actually have a little more formal circle process, which is going to be kept very discreet, but will
mm,
help you take the steps to sort of get back into relationship again. And again, if you can teach that as a skill, it becomes a mindset. Yeah.
mm. You were already mentioning a bit how you do the selection process for the people guiding mentors, specialists at the Learn Life facilities. But how do you create that environment also for everyone there to and also be able to share those insights, possibilities, be there for the kids and in a very relationship driven way? How do you make sure that that's there?
I think it's got to be authentic as adults. If we
Mm-hmm.
can't do it, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
become very transparent to the kids.
Yeah.
So therefore, you've got to be able to do it with the adults. Now that means
Mm,
that professional development always has to be relational, hands-on, and not something that's theory delivered to someone else.
yeah.
Adults are going to have to learn the same way that they're expecting the kids to learn going through. I mean, we had a lot of fun exercises in Australia with that one, because when we were growing and we had this enormous building project in the middle of the school, it was right at the time when I wanted the teachers to start thinking about, well, how could they establish their spaces differently? That gave us the perfect opportunity to say, well, rather than coming in to hear a lecture about different learning spaces, we're going to send you out with money to go to 2 coffee shops, cafes, and go to this museum and choose another couple of spaces that you really like, go with your group of colleagues, and then come back and see what that has meant to your own space and what you'd like to change. So that sort of process of collaborative learning as well becomes pretty powerful. And then if you can shift the entire budget process to say that anything that you want money-wise has to support the wider vision and mission, that means that you've got to then think through, even if I want some paper for this activity, I've got to be able to ask for it in the context of the vision and the mission, so that you're then bringing everything around what you actually want to do.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. No, that makes it very practical. Nice. I'm very intrigued as well. You already mentioned it in the beginning about Rwanda, Learnlife Rwanda, and I would love to know more about it, because it sounded also, what I read about, it sounded like a venture studio in a way, a very holistic venture studio. And what is the vision behind? And yeah, tell us a little bit more about it, please.
Well, yeah, as I said, I've been going to Rwanda for 17 years. The first 12 years, I was involved in running professional development for teachers in the Northern Province for one of the groups that ran the schools in that province, because the government schools are divided up between church groups and others to manage because of the sheer numbers. So I guess at a grassroots level, I started to understand Rwanda quite deeply, and also form some very good relationships going through. Now, one of those happened to be with a lady who finished up. She was the head of the IT infrastructure in Rwanda for a while when I met her, first of all, but she finished up becoming the Minister for Education. And so a couple of years ago, she invited me to her office, and I was there with a group from Learnlife from Barcelona, kids and parents. And so I thought, okay, I'll take one of the learners who I knew was a very good advocate for what we're doing, and he can come with me to the office to meet her. And also a close friend who he started off as my translator 17 years ago, but he's now 32, and he's a very competent adult with a couple of university degrees. So he came as well, plus also the father of the student, the learner. And we went there, and then Claudette threw a question to me, and she said, Stephen, if you started Learnlife in Rwanda, what would you do? And I sort of put on the spot, because I'd never imagined, that actually might happen. So I said, okay, it wouldn't be a school and it wouldn't be a college or a university, because the government's doing that. And, there's too many regulations, too many rules, and we wouldn't cope. So I said, but the group that I can see that is really needing something are the graduates, or the people whose life stories have meant that they've not really had opportunities. So I said I would target a program which actually helps people to understand, how do you collaborate into a small business team and start a social impact project going through. So that was the vision that I gave. And then about a month later, the parent of the learner from Barcelona contacted me, and he said that he wanted to invest in a startup for 2 years. And allow us to start now. So we're in the process where we've now into our third cohort. So it's a free program. I knew that we couldn't charge for it, because people just, if you're unemployed but no money, then it's even worse in a country like that. So it had to be free. We had 30 applicants for 20 positions for the first 2 cohorts. this third cohort that we're pulling together, we've got over 700 applicants for it, which absolutely shows the need for what we're trying to do. But the cohorts are now overlapping. So the first group have actually finished the program. They've created some businesses, and they're now trying to attract funding for their startup idea. The second group are getting to the point of getting their teams and their ideas firmed up, and then the third group is ready to kick off. So we're actually allowing this overlapping. And then I don't know whether you looked at the LearnLife Rwanda webpage, but we to then help fund it, we've got 6 side businesses happening. Well, I'll reach over here for a second. One of the things that I started doing, I write children's books
Yes, I saw that.
Going through. That was because there was no books that reflected their culture in the schools. So what we're doing now is that basically the profits of these book sales is one of our little side businesses. We've got an arts gallery which was started by he's now a man, he's 22, but I met him when he was 10. It's a person with multiple disabilities. He can't hear and he can't speak, but he's got incredible artistic skills. And so he's our artist in residence, and that's another little side business. And we've started a coffee shop called the Sip and Chat Cafe. So we've got these multiple little side businesses. That the most recent one is in Gamba Consultancy, which is that means strategies. And basically our team can actually run professional development for an organization to help them become more focused on strategic delivery or whatever it is that they want. So we've got these abilities to sort of to provide services to other people or to sell a few products to help start to grow the income, the side income, until the point of where the businesses that start through our program, we're going to retain 15% equity in them to then ensure their success and to help mentoring people, so that it's an ongoing relationship, and ultimately that will become the business model you're going through. But we've got to get to that place where we've got the income coming in to sustain the 5 amazing people who run the program.
Wow. And what is your role right now in the whole process of it? How?
Well, my friend Alyosha, who's the parent, he and I are the co-partners of the program. So we've actually created all of the modules that the team deliver, and we used AI and panels of virtual experts to sort of really get, I guess, some amazing programs developed that really, really looked at what do the people need. And I knew that one of the biggest issues initially is it's simply communication skills and confidence and collaboration. So we use a lot of improv drama. So the first sort of month really is all about improv drama, relationships, becoming communicative, confident, and all of those things. And then we start bringing in financial literacy in the Kigali context. Then we all start bringing in business understandings and what you need to do. But the hardest thing we've found is to help people develop real deep trust in each other. So that's, again, we have to focus on those things. So my role has been with Alyosha. We've created the program between us. After this call now, I'm about to go into my weekly call with Barak Habu-Migisha, who's the CEO of the program there, the Chief Entertainment Officer. And we meet with him each week for an hour where we look at, we answer questions and we talk about, well, what's the next topic that's needing to be sort of considered. And it's been interesting to see what has emerged almost week by week by week as they learn what are people struggling with and what do we need to sort of be able to help people with. And then we have a second group meeting on a Thursday each week where we, again, what I love about that is that the team from Rwanda run it, and they've really understood the relational part. So the first sort of half an hour is actually just sharing life and different questions, fun games, or whatever else, because they can see that that is so important to the efficiency of a team. Yeah,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Hey,
I'd love people in other countries and in developed countries to see what actually happens when you put real focus on trusting and respecting each other. Yeah,
yeah. No, and it's just so fascinating to see that infrastructure being built and creating opportunities like those, because I think even here we would need it, like to
yeah,
have these possibilities to actually go out and create and start businesses from scratch, especially when you don't have maybe the investment needed,
yeah.
like your bank account.
Well, and we have to work out ways. Well, how do we actually help people break down that challenge of finding investors? And we're working on a triad model at the moment where the team themselves need to try and come up with about 20% of the funding for what they ultimately want, from their own resources, because then it's their skin in the game, as it were. And then if we are then looking for two external partners,
Mm,
for probably a few thousand US each, um, that's far easier than finding someone for 10, you know.
mm,
So that again, helping them to break down the challenge, but they can also go to a bank more realistically if they've got
yeah,
20% sort of has been sort of saved between themselves, to then go to the bank to ask for a loan, a business loan to start off, or to get a grant or whatever else. So yeah, we're learning all of these things as we go.
wow, wow. So fascinating and so inspiring. And already going into the ending questions, just because you gotta go to a call as well to really keep going and doing all this. Um, what has recently surprised you?
um, I think the thing that's most surprised me and intrigued me has been trying to work out how has the community at Barcelona of kids grown into this effectively zero bullying environment, because we haven't done it. And I've been trying to work out what is what's the grassroots of what they're doing, which has created that. And they look quite surprised when they have a teacher from elsewhere coming in, to observe, and they say, "Oh, how do you handle bullying?" And the kids sort of stare as if to say, what are you talking about? What is that?" So that's been a pleasant surprise. Um, and look, and then I mean, with my Rwanda project, I look at the artwork that Bizimana um, has created. This man now that's I've known since he was 10, that was the village reject because he couldn't speak and he couldn't hear. I'm just going to find a picture that shows you. Yeah, I bought this painting. His ability to paint,
Wow.
and he's entirely self-taught. And I look at that, and I see him, and I think I shouldn't be surprised. There he is. Yeah. Um, I smile when I'm in Kigali, because I don't know how he's doing it, but he's actually finding other people from the same community, other people who are deaf and mute. They come past, and they're actually out the front gate, and I can use a little bit of sign language, and get them to bring them in. And I think, how are you finding these people? How are you doing this? Yeah, going through. And then I discovered that we went to the markets with them, and one of the benefits of not being able to hear or speak is that if he doesn't like the amount that someone's charging for food, he just walks away. And they can't call out after him because he's not going to hear it. So I think they've learnt they've got one shot to sort of suggest a price, and he knows exactly what's fair and what's not fair. And I look at that and think, we often look at disabilities and think that it's, of course, it's different and it's a struggle, but these are people who are highly intelligent and they're doing an amazing job. So I guess that doesn't surprise me. It just encourages me. Yeah.
Beautiful. And where do you see us heading towards to within all the educational systems? How do you see it from maybe 5 to 10 years from now? Do you see Learn Life inspiring a lot of other?
I mean, that's the vision and the mission for Learn Life, is to try and do that, to get groups around the world who want to start their own version, and we support them, and ultimately they support each other. So, because it can't be all coming from one place, and we are starting to see that. There's groups in Mallorca and Ibiza, and I've been working with a group in South America, and I'm helping design some schools in Portugal. I mean, so those sort of things are happening, but the biggest problem at the moment are politicians and bureaucrats, because their political cycles are so short that they don't want to change systems because they don't want to get voted out. And so therefore you do have the problem of governments find it very hard to change. What's interesting is that Finland, the country that sort of is known for doing education quite well, is that they made education non-political years ago. So it's actually that it's not subject to government change. Education is bipartisan. Very simple switch,
Yeah.
which other countries should do. There is a wave occurring. I can see it around the world, of the recognition that the exam system doesn't work in many contexts, because it produces people who can memorize well but then hate the course that they finish up in, or um, it can exclude people who should never be excluded. So I think, again, it really comes down to creativity. I love the fact that in the New Zealand context, New Zealanders can apply for university at the age of 20, regardless of their school experience. And that's one way of overcoming the disadvantage that Maori and Pacific Islander communities have felt in the education system, because suddenly anyone can go. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that that's a problem, because if you've got the motivation to go at the age of 20 and you haven't got the right learning, well, then the university has to find a bridging course to get you to where you want to go. So I love that logic. And I guess my hope would be that that type of logic starts to spread into other governments. Yeah.
Because how do you see this new world in the making? What is it for you, and what do you think? What are the skills that we need and will be needing even more?
The skill of the two key skills we're seeing in Rwanda really are at the heart of so many things. It's how do we trust each other? Because we look at countries that are going split down the middle, politically. How do we genuinely listen to each other, and how do we collaborate? I think those are the skills that, if you can do those, then you're going to start, the problem solving and the creative solutions will start coming in. But we've really got to focus on helping people in this world where technology and learning is different, and everything's changing. How do you bring those skills into the front and center of the learning communities, the schools, because they need to be there.
Yeah, sure. So true. Um, the last question always is a question for you to leave the listeners to reflect upon. What kind of question would that be?
So, I think it would be simple. What is it in your own world that you have got responsibility for, that you could change, that would make the learning for someone else and the life for someone else better?
Wow. I'm definitely gonna reflect on this one. And happy to share that one with everyone else. Thank you so much, Stephen. This has been such an honor, really, and such an inspiration. And yeah, I love all the projects that you're involved in. So thank you for
So
making them available.
it's been a pleasure. Been great.
Thank you.